Welcome to this video. This video is titled Mind Map, which sounds a bit mysterious. Truth is, it's not overly mysterious. This is basically an introduction video for this cluster, but it is an important one. Please don't consider skipping it, even though it's like a mind map introduction, because there's some very important concepts we're going to be introducing to you in this video. But firstly, before I get into the nitty-gritty about the assessment cluster, I just want to give you a little bit of background about assessment and where we're coming from with respect to the way that this cluster has been organised. This cluster includes 4 units of competency: TAE ASS 401, TAE ASS 402, TAE ASS 403, TAE ASS 502. It's about planning assessments, conducting assessments, validating assessments, and designing and developing assessment tools. It covers a very broad spectrum of assessment tasks that we undergo typically in registered training organisations. So before I get into the nitty-gritty about that, let me backtrack even more just to say that the way that this cluster is focused, it's clustered very much around what RTOs do. So what are RTOs? Well, RTOs are registered training organisations, and in Australia there's over 4,000 registered training organisations, and we're all been through processes of approval through the Australian government. I'll get there in a minute. All been through processes of registration through Australian government and state government and territory government endorsed processes. It's quite a lengthy formal process to become a registered training organisation. If you want to be working with a registered training organisation as an assessor here in Australia, you're going to want this course and specifically this assessment cluster under your belt. Now, you might not be living in Australia, you might be living overseas. We do have a lot of overseas students who also do these courses with us, and you may not be working for a registered training organisation here in Australia. You might be working within an enterprise, you might be an enterprise trainer in industry who has nothing to do with qualifications and RTO courses, etc. That's fine too. Whether you're in Australia, whether you're not in Australia, whether you work for an RTO or not, what you're going to experience during this cluster is the best practice processes for competency-based assessment. Now, we'll have a video and some information later in the cluster about competency-based assessment, identifying the difference between competency-based assessment as compared to other processes of assessment. But here in Australia, we all part of the vocational education and training system. That's what RTOs do, and that's what we're training you for during this course. Not for schools, not for universities, but for vocational education and training, which some people might describe as real-world training. I think that's a little overboard, but it's basically to check that people can train and assess with real-world practical skills that are there for the workforce. And it's about assessing people. It's not about doing random assessments of functions or features or processes. Ultimately, when we talk about in this assessment cluster, we talk about assessing people. We're assessing their competency, their capabilities in either skills, knowledge, or attitudes. That's what we're assessing. And we're there to make decisions about whether or not they are competent, whether they can perform work tasks satisfactorily or not. So that's the background for what I'm about to show you. So let's go and have a look at the mind map. Now, this is something that's been put together by the Mr. Wed Learning leaders to help you get a feel for what's involved in this cluster and the journey that we're going on. And like so many industries in Australia and overseas, there are some key terms that you need to know before you can get in the gate. To get into the gate, you need to understand the language and the jargon so that you can converse effectively with other assessors. So let's go in the gate and start the journey. And during this journey of assessment, we're going to be introducing key terms like the principles of assessment, the rules of evidence, assessment methods, mapping processes. And as we learn about these key terms and these key theories, will progress along the road and will progress along our journey. What we're headed towards is the house that TAE ASS 502 built. And that house, basically, in terms of functional skills, we'll show you how to plan assessments, how to design the tools and develop them, and how to review them. And ultimately, we will be showing you, and you will have the opportunity of actually creating assessment tools as well. It says create one here, create one at a time. You'll actually be creating multiple assessment tools before you complete this cluster. We'll show you everything you need to know to be able to develop assessment tools, including the side wing, which is RPL, Recognition of Prior Learning. We'll explain that later during the cluster, and you'll also be able to develop RPL assessment tools as you move through this journey. Now, we always need to be aware of the outhouse, the shed out the back, the WH&S responsibilities. That's a theme that pops up from time to time during this cluster, and in fact in all of the clusters of the course. We need to protect the work health and safety of us as assessors, and also the candidates that we're assisting and any other stakeholders in the assessment process. Around the fence, around our property, we've got some other things that we'll be learning about. One of them is the assessment system. The assessment system is the broader system that we're creating that will help us to manage the assessment process. It's important. And within the assessment system, some of the things that we develop are the assessment plan, the assessment instruments, and the assessment tools. In truth, the instruments are part of the tools. We'll explain that later during the cluster. And the assessment plan is often the starting point to help us do all of these processes here to help us be able to create an assessment tool. So that's the journey we're embarking on. Now, I've only given you a slight reference here to what each of these terms means. Don't panic. You're going, what does Damien talking about? What does that term mean? At this stage, I just want to introduce you to the terms and try and give some context to them in terms of the assessment process and what we're going to be encountering in this cluster. Welcome to the journey. We hope you enjoy your road as we move through the key terms and head along the journey to success and help you become competent and confident in all processes of assessment. Good luck with your journey.